Hey everyone, Tim Anderson here, aka Renfill. Finishing up a handful of nuts here, some trail mix. Welcome to the latest episode in Mondays in MMORPGs. I believe this is episode 48, if I'm not mistaken. And today we are talking about when is an MMORPG not an MMORPG? Like, when is an MMO not an MMO? That's a tricky one because these days MMOs aren't the same as they used to be. Another way to look at it is, I believe the title of this episode is When the MMORPG is a Lie. We're going to be talking about MMORPGs that don't have a massively multiplayer component to them, and what's the point of continuing to use the MMORPG label when it no longer applies. We're going to dive into that a little bit today. But before we do, if this is your first time tuning in, make sure to check out all the other videos in the Mondays in MMORPG playlist here on YouTube. Go through those, go through the back catalog. And if you like what you hear today, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you get updates on future content. And of course, don't forget to like the video and leave a comment below. Also, join our Discord if you would like. All the links for all those things are below. All right, let's dive in. So I got to thinking about this. I know we've somewhat talked about this in one or two previous episodes with different guest hosts. And the conversation usually comes back to some element of, you know, all this solo ability within MMORPGs. But I really got thinking about it because recently I've been playing two games in particular, Star Wars: The Old Republic and New World. Now, looking at the former, Star Wars: The Old Republic started off as a group-based game, subscription-based, group-based game back in the day when it launched. And when it first launched, you needed a group to do pretty much everything except for the story missions and the world quests. All of the two-man, they call them two-mans, but it says two plus. Those were meant for 2 to 4 players. And then, of course, the flashpoints, which required 4 players. All of those things used to require a group. You couldn't do those by yourself. The difficulty rating was just too high. You had to have a group. Over the years, especially after the game went free to play, and also, by the way, that game did not used to have a matchmaker. You used to have to actually physically talk to other players to get groups going. And so you would see a lot of what you currently see in New World, which is players congregating at the entrance to dungeons, or in the case of Star Wars: The Old Republic, the entrance to the flashpoints, looking for a group. Now, the current way that Star Wars: The Old Republic plays is it's not an MMORPG anymore. It is a single player game that exists in a virtual space where you have the option to do some group based content if you want. That group based content being flashpoints and operations. But here's the thing with the flashpoints. You can choose to do the flashpoints on what's known as story mode. And during story mode, they give you this badass robot NPC who comes with you, who is a tank and a healer. And basically, when you go into combat, that mob acts as the other 3 members of your non existent group. And you could just relax and do whatever it is that you want to do. And that character will not only keep you alive, but will keep itself alive and keep all the mobs on it. And as long as you don't train like 500 things across the zone, those story mode missions are um, really easy. Now, they've also done the same thing in Lord of the Rings Online over the years now. They don't give you a robot, but they do give you a stone, which buffs your character up, and you get a whole bunch of hit points, and you are now buffed up as if you were as heroic person like Legolas or Gimli or Aragorn, and you can wade through these previously group-based encounters on your own. So I have to ask the question, especially in the case of looking like a game like Star Wars Republic, why do these companies keep calling these games MMORPGs? I have always been of the opinion that the MMO in MMORPG stands for massively multiplayer online, right? So some people love to interpret that as, oh, it just means lots of people online in the same space. I have never interpreted that way. I've always interpreted that as content that requires multiple people to complete. Massively multiplayer. Um, the RPG doesn't really matter at that point. We could just focus on the MMO aspect. When the MMO is a lie. Because so many of these games that are out these days and that come out are not MMORPGs in the classical sense. They're something else. So why are we still using the old terminology? Why aren't we coming up with something else? Like, we have the Battle Royale genre, that spun up out of old, you know, lobby-based shooter games and multiplayer games. Um, we gave that genre its own unique titling. So why are companies still stuck on this, terminology of MMORPG where they think that they have to call any sort of multiplayer game an MMORPG? Why can't we just call these games multiplayer fantasy games, multiplayer RPGs? You know, I don't know. I don't know what the terminology needs to be, but it makes me laugh because as I'm going through Star Wars: Old Republic, I'm playing with my brother on Mondays and Wednesday nights, and we are playing as a group. But it's cakewalk. Like we are literally going into these old two-man instances that used to require like three people because they were really difficult to get through if it was just two people, even if you had your companions, because it was just challenging group-based content. But then looking at the way it's balanced now, you could technically go in just with your companion and just wipe that content out without any sort of challenge whatsoever. So when two players go in together and they have their companions with them, it's you're literally just smashing your face in the keyboard. It's that easy. Um, and then of course, as I've gone through and I'm doing the story mode for my Sith Juggernaut, those class missions were never designed to be uh, group based in any way, shape, or form. But as I've gone through deeper in the game, having looked at the overall scope of where the game is at these days at the end of 2021, it is very much a single player game. I'd say like 90% of that game is single player, if not more. And then they have this sort of additional element. I mean, you could even call it a, icing on the cake, so to speak, but it's this tiny little aspect of the game, which is basically operations, because you can do all of the flashpoints by yourself in story mode. And unless I'm mistaken, I think the only thing that you can't do by yourself, the only thing is operations. And operations are not part of the main storyline. They are standalone content, and it makes up at most 10% of the game. I would estimate that it's less than that. It's probably more like 5%. So let's spin back around and look at a more modern game, New World, as an example. So New World's been out for a hot minute now. I've got 60 hours of gameplay into that game. I played a lot in the first week it came out, and then I haven't played so much since then. I think I've only played like one session in the past week. And a lot of that is because I find myself wanting to do group-based content, but the vast majority of players don't want to. And when you do get a group together, people don't want to take the time to actually explore the dungeon or to do the storyline. They want to rush. Every group I have joined for dungeons has rushed off while I'm trying to read the notes that you find in the dungeon because I want to know the lore of the game. And it's very frustrating because everybody has this mentality of me first, and that's bred out of this, single player mechanic where you can do almost everything in that game can be done single player. You don't need a group to level up your character. You don't need a group to harvest. You don't need a group to craft. You don't need a group to do anything unless you're going to focus on the siege warfare or doing dungeons. And there's only a handful of dungeons, and those can be done with 5 people. You could do them with as few as 3. And the way I feel about that game these days is having gone into that game since launch, it's very much solo centric, and it's very much me first, to the point where one of the mechanics that a lot of people complain about is the fact that when you kill a mob, like something that can be skinned in particular, um, a bear or a wolf or something, it's not locked to you. So whoever gets to the corpse first can skin it and get the skin from it and any quest related loot that's on that as well, which continues to foster the solo aspect of that game, or the me first mentality, because players will absolutely ninja loot and ninja skin your mobs if you are a ranged character. A lot of people have just said that you need to have a melee build specifically so that when you're doing those types of quests, you're not trying to take mobs out from a distance. Because if you are, someone else will get to that corpse before you. They will ninja loot it, take the quest item, and run off. And because anybody who tags a mob gets credit for the kill, meaning that multiple people can get credit for that kill. If you're on a quest where it's a kill quest with a loot component, what people will do is you'll have the melee characters running around just tagging everything they can tag, and then making sure that they're the first one to the corpse to loot it so that they get the credit for the quest item that they need, and then they're gone. All of this comes back to this mentality of, well, I can solo my way through the game, I can solo my way to max level, I can solo my way through the quests. What do I need to group up with other people for? And the only time that people need to group up with each other is to go do these 5-man dungeons. But even in those instances, players are focused so much because it's been ingrained in them that it's the me thing, the solo ability, that they'll just be rushing off ahead and not paying attention to what the other people in the group need. That's been my experience. I realize that's not the experience for everybody. It is a little different because this is the first time that I've played a game without a static group. I joined this overall group, this overall guild of people made up of like a bunch of players who were waiting for Pantheon. And the tribalism aspect that I really dislike in games is prevalent there as well, in the sense that everybody's kind of got their pre-designed groups. And I've done a couple of, 3 or 4, I think, at this point, guild dungeon runs, which are good. But I've also had to do a lot of pickup groups because there's not always guildmates available to do the runs when I'm available to play. Which brings me back to the pros and cons of that group finder, which there's an aspect of the group finder that makes an MMORPG less social because you don't need to communicate with people to get a group going. You can just put your name in a list and get yourself a group. But coming into this now, I have a very different opinion on this than I did like 4 or 5 years ago. It's very fun how that works. Because if you would ask me 4 or 5 years ago, I would absolutely tell you that I can't stand group finders. I don't want group finders in my game. All these things. And as I've gotten older, I've gone, actually, you know what? I realize the negative aspects of the group finders, especially when it comes to continuing that me first mentality, the solo ability mentality. But also, I think the pros outweigh the cons in this case, because the pro is that you don't have to wait for other people to be able to do the content that you want to do. So when you have time and you're online, you can find like-minded people who need the same things that you do, and you can get that done. And that's one thing that New World does not have right now, which is the the group finder. It is very much like, say, Star Wars: Out of Public was at the beginning, or EverQuest 1, EverQuest 2. You know, uh, even does Lord of the Rings Online? I don't think Lord of the Rings Online has a. Maybe they do. I just don't ever use it. Most games have a dungeon finder these days, but New World doesn't. So you have to actually go and meet up with other people, um, and hang out at the dungeon entrance or use a chat channel and wait for people to group up with, which does harken back to a time when MMORPGs actually required groups to do the content. But the actual dungeon component of New World is such a tiny part of that game. I mean, if I had to break that game down into the type of content that exists in it, I would say it's 80% solo PvE, 5% PvE dungeons, and 15% PvP and or settlement PvP, land rushes, or outpost rushes, those kind of things. But it still is a primarily PvE, solo your way to cap, solo your way around the world, solo your way through quests type of game. Um, and it just got me back to thinking about, why don't we start calling these games something else? I don't know what that is. I think we talked about this in a previous episode with Scribbles and some other guys about, you know, coming up with new terminology. And the more I think about it, the more I think it would be a good idea because these are not, in my mind, they're not MMORPGs in the classical sense. And I see so many games that are coming out or in development, I should say. We don't know if they're coming out or not. So many games that are in development right now by all these independent developers. And they're calling themselves MMORPGs. And I start to go look at all of these games and I'm like, well, what part of your game is actually massively multiplayer? Because everything I'm reading and everything I'm seeing in your pre-alphas and everything else suggests that your game is a single player game, single player RPG set in a multiplayer world where you can interact with other people, but at no point in time do you need other people to go out and do the content. And don't get me wrong, I love both types of games. I love MMORPGs for the grouping aspect, and I love single player games for the, oh, I've got 30 minutes, I can log in and play by myself, do something fun, save the game, go off and do something else. I don't know. I'd love to know your thoughts on this, everybody. So let me know in the comments below. I just feel that as we get deeper into, I mean, this is what, the third or fourth generation now, depending on how you look at it, of MMORPGs. And we've got a bunch of games that are in development, supposedly coming out in the next 3 to 5 years. And only a handful of those actually have any sort of group based gameplay. Like, Pantheon is one of the ones I think, has a heavy group based element. And Ashes of Creation, Camelot Unchained, those two games seem to have some heavy PvP components, which do require, the grouping and the multiplayer component. But a lot of other ones don't, especially when you start talking about survival games. And that's one of the things that concerns me about the upcoming Dune adaptation that Funcom is doing, because the Conan games were never multiplayer. Yes, they have PvP elements in it, but they're just basically solo games. And you could choose to have friends, but I don't know. What are your thoughts? Are MMORPGs really MMORPG anymore, or are they just single player games set in a multiplayer space? And do we need new terminology? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you get updates for future content. Stick around. We got another episode coming at you next week. And of course, don't forget to check out all the other things that we're doing here on YouTube. And join our Discord if you want. Come hang out with us over there. Links are below. I'll talk to everybody next week. Stay safe, stay healthy, safe gaming, everybody.